Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the variously named dupe rockets. Their continuing mission, to explore strange new planetoids, to seek out the source of supercoolant, to boldly go where no dupe has gone before, which is in fact a darkly named temporal tear that will no doubt destroy the rocket and any dupe within it. So we've got that going for us. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today's the episode that I've been promising. We're going to space. One small problem though. Hi Hatch. I don't want to go to space on a steam engine, a sugar engine, or a carbon dioxide engine. In fact, we wanted to use petroleum. And I don't mind starting off with this small petroleum engine, except we haven't researched it. And unfortunately, we don't have the capability to produce data analysis research quite yet. Now, we had been using some of our data banks that we've been collecting from around the planetoids to knock out some key research that we've been needing, solid management being one of them. And then who can go a colony without having a pixel pack? Was it worth the 30 data banks? I say yes. Of course, if we didn't spend the 30 data banks on pixel packs to make our kitchen look good, we'd have the data banks available for hydrocarbon propulsion. Instead, we have a fabulous looking kitchen and great hall, and no rocket engine. Lucky for us, there's still plenty of vents and geysers around here that we haven't analyzed, so we went around looking for the ones that are dormant. This hydrogen vent erupts at 500 C. I'd much rather get this thing analyzed before it decides to become active again. Miko Nala is going to be working on it. We also have a carbon dioxide geyser down here that would also give us some data banks, and it erupts at minus 55. Not a big deal. It's not like this planetoid's not a frigid wasteland to begin with, so it's a little bit more cold added to the problem. Then there's this chlorine gas vent. It's dormant too, and only erupts at 60 C. No big deal either. We will be releasing about 40 kilos worth of chlorine to get into it, but if that's the price we have to pay. So I'm hoping by analyzing these three vents and geysers, it'll give us the needed data banks to research hydrocarbon propulsion. If not, there's always this gold volcano, although it is not dormant at this time. We also have a carbon dioxide vent. It's not dormant either, and this carbon dioxide vent erupts at 500 C as well, so I'd rather wait to do this one too. So I'll get back to you in a little while once Miko finishes analyzing some of these things. Meanwhile, a quick update on this massive debris chilling situation here. As you can see, this rail is pretty much stopped, and it's because the rail that's extending past the conveyor shutoff is blocked. And the conveyor shutoff doesn't like that very much, so it sort of halts traffic here. We also had to move this conveyor bridge. I originally had it here, but it's important that you have the bridge that's coming onto your loop after the conveyor shutoff, and that way everything will keep spinning. Otherwise, what was happening is all this material was forcing its way onto the loop before the material had an opportunity to cool down, and the conveyor shutoff let it out. And the only reason any of this is happening to begin with is we had such a huge backlog of materials to take out. Eventually it'll all be caught up and the system will work perfect. As it stands, this debris chiller is doing more work than any other in this playthrough. Not only is it cooling down all the metal, which comes in at over 240 C, and it's 240 C by the way because we're keeping this area as hot as possible to keep the power output on these steam turbines as high as possible. It's also cooling down all this petroleum to under 25 degrees. That way when it makes the trek all the way up to space, there's absolutely no heat bleed. Miko finished the hydrogen vent and we were rewarded with 11 data banks. All the data banks are instantly sent over here via the supply teleporter output, where they'll eventually be brought over to the storage bin. 11 down, 19 to go. Next up, this carbon dioxide geyser. There's a good chance that Miko's going to get hypothermia from this, but hey, all in the name of science. Incidentally, we were able to crush all that carbon dioxide that had been sitting on this planetoid. We got rid of the carbon skimmer. Not really needed when you're pumping everything but oxygen all the way to space. I love these little systems. They're very low power. You add a couple of pieces of automation and that way it doesn't activate when there's oxygen. And for your efforts, you're rewarded with a nice clean atmosphere like this. Chalk up this geyser. That's another 9 data banks. And now that we're done with it, we'll go ahead and seal it in after we get everything swept and then move on to the chlorine gas vent. Now I believe chlorine is heavier than oxygen, so if I break into the top here, we may not get as much of a chlorine spill. Not that it matters much. We'll pump all of it to space as well. So I came back here to check our databank supply, and somehow we have 32. The duplicants must have caught up on tasks and then picked up some other ones from around the planetoid. I'm not sure, but now we have enough. Let's go ahead and get our small petroleum engine, shall we? With that underway, it's probably time to start our rockets. We're actually going to start off with 2 of them. And the reason why is because one is probably going to start exploring what they can depending on our range, and the second is going to go to orbit to start building our databanks. Additionally, on Frostine, we're going to put in another enclosed telescope. If you remember, we already did all of our telescoping here, hence the reason why you see this giant revealed hex around our main planetoid. But Frostine is way over here. By putting another telescope there, we'll be able to reveal even more of the surrounding area before we even get into a rocket. Incidentally, we did find another planetoid, although you can't go look at it anymore. You used to be able to oversee the planetoid as soon as you revealed it. Clay's gotten wise to that. With our engine research complete, it is time to build some rocket engines. Couple of small petroleum engines, made out of steel of course. Now to show you the difference of why we didn't want to sacrifice and use a carbon dioxide engine or anything else, even though the small petroleum engine's not the large petroleum engine, you can see that it has a height of 20, engine power of 31, and speed of 6.2. Compare that with the height of 10 and the engine power of 23 out of the carbon dioxide engine, the engine power of 16 and the height of 16 out of the sugar engine, and then the engine power of 27 and the height of 25, and a much slower speed out of the steam engine. And if we take a trip over to the Oxygen Not Included wiki, we can see some other details that you can't necessarily see from the construction screen. For instance, the small petroleum engine is the first engine that you can add fuel tanks to, which means we'll be able to decide our own fate on how far this rocket will be able to travel, unlike the steam, sugar, and carbon dioxide engine that have a set range. Our engines are complete, and now it's time to design what they're going to look like. They're definitely not going to be the same. One's only going to orbit, so it doesn't need extra fuel. And we're going to want some extra fuel for that rocket, so we're back to research and grabbing advanced caffeination. Now, why the espresso machine is in the same research as the large liquid fuel tank, I don't know. ONI things. But let's grab this one real quick. In other news, I was starting to contemplate grabbing another dupe. But we're starting to get into a bottleneck for our oxygen supply. We're running 4 gas pumps. And remember, each gas pump can only take out 500 grams per second, which means at 100% efficiency, this one gas pump could provide oxygen for 5 duplicants. But if we go over to the properties, we can see that it's only been running on average of 40% of the time. This one's 60, this one's 72, and this one's 72. When you do that math, considering these 2 can supply oxygen for 10 dupes and these 2 can provide oxygen for 10 dupes, in practice, they're only producing enough for 7 for these 2 and 5 to 6 for these 2. And the limitation is not actually the amount of oxygen we're producing through the sublimation stations, because you can see they hit max gas pressure pretty often. Rather, it's the design of the polluted oxygen rising, being converted over into regular oxygen before finally being pumped out. Now this Atmos sensor is set on 800 grams, so these pumps won't actually pump any oxygen until there's more than 800 grams. I think I'm going to spend a little bit of time trying to see if I can improve this design to increase the amount of oxygen we're supplying to the colony, keeping in mind that any adjustments will likely change the amount of sand that we require. Not that that seems to be an issue by any stretch. And it's not as if we're having oxygen problems. You can see our atmosuit tanks stay 100% full. It's just the amount of gas pressure inside the pipes that is sort of the bottleneck. So I think what we're going to do is add a couple of gas pumps here, shift this conveyor loader over, and see what we can do. Which unfortunately means I also need to move this carbon dioxide run that's feeding our slicksters. Even more difficult is going to be moving around some of these power lines. I might be able to tap into some of these, but some of them are at their max capacity. We've completed renovations on our oxygen supply, and boy do I like it. We now have 5 pumps on this run and 3 pumps on this run. And you might be thinking, well, a gas pipe can only hold 1 kilo, and this is 2,500 kilos worth of oxygen being pumped. But here's the deal. Because there's more area for the oxygen to float around into, there's sort of like a backlog or a battery full of oxygen. And when oxygen's being produced, they'll take their turns until their pressure is normalized, because all of them are set from these atmosensors. And you can tell the improvement's had because this leg of oxygen is completely backed up to the source with everything going out to the atmosphere. And this one is starting to do the same thing here. So it's not going to take long for this increased oxygen flow to improve this whole system overall. Another update in the series, we've managed to completely catch up on our backlog of debris that we're sending through the debris chiller. And since this line isn't backed up, this loop is working perfectly. And these steam turbines absolutely love the power that they're getting. You can see that while they're disabled right now on the smart battery, each one of them is maxed out on power, and that's because we have both of these thermosensors set at 250. That way, as soon as the debris is ready, it leaves and allows for more heat to generate. Miko has finished up the telescoping over on Frostine as well. I just realized I've been calling it Frostine for about 14 episodes now, and it's Frostalin. Oops. Other than the embarrassing mispronunciation, we did find another planetoid, and it's the gassy Moo planet. Probably looking forward to this one the most because in all my playthroughs, I don't think I've ever tried to colonize a gassy Moo planet. But it also means we can get rid of this enclosed telescope, and at the minimum, reclaim all this beautiful oxygen too. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you the Experimental Adios 2 and the Curious Sputnik. I really need to install the mod that allows you to rename the rockets. And I tell you what, think of the funniest or most creative names for these two rockets, and I'll pick two out in the comments below, and you'll have the honor of naming them. That was definitely a pro-level YouTube comment plug. We'll start with the Experimental Adios 2. It's going to be outfitted with the cartographic module. Now, I'm not 100% sure how far this thing's going to be able to go when we get it fueled, but the idea is that rocket will be able to fly around, continuously scanning some of these other unknown objects. But we'll find out soon because I've already connected a liquid pump to the storage tank, and this is going to be sort of a buffer for all of our petroleum. The liquid pipes go straight down here. We use some obsidian insulated liquid pipe towards the end because we don't want to superheat the petroleum in the pipes and create a bunch of sour gas. Not that it'd be a big deal, it would just dissipate into the vacuum of space, but then we'd have to repair the pipes, we'd lose some petroleum, you know, more ONI things. Speaking of which, look at all this beautiful petroleum. We have 24 tiles here, and each tile is holding 750 kilos worth of petroleum. That's 18 tons of petroleum. I think our rocket program's gonna be just fine. The next rocket, the Curious Sputnik, was going to be our orbital data collection rocket. And then I realized, we can fly around the star map while we're doing that research. There's no reason we have to stay in orbit. So since we're going to be going around, we've equipped this one with a rover's module. And we'll take that rocket and go to each of these planetoids and drop off a rover. And that way we can finally oversee the planetoid. Rover can go take a look, and that way we can sort of recon the planetoid and see what the best way is going to be to land on it. Now let's take a look at the rocket's interiors. I have a couple new designs that I think you're going to appreciate. Starting off with the Curious Sputnik, whose mission is to drop off the rover and do some orbital data collection on the way. We have 3 rooms, the barracks, the mess hall, and a washroom. All of this is crammed in here because most of it's industrial machinery and it would break most of the room types. Now I know we have a battery on top of the rocket, but this battery allows you to control the manual generator just to keep the whole rocket charged while we're on a planet. Some other nice features, we have a duplicate motion sensor connected to a light. That way we can get the well-lit buff for doing some orbital data collection and while we eat. Very nice. We've got 10 tons of plastic being stored in here, and the reason why we have 10 tons is if you go look at the orbital data collection lab, you can see that it takes 5 kilos worth of plastic to create 1 unit. Using this math, you can determine exactly how many data banks you need. You go to your research screen and you count up every single piece of data analysis research that you need. So this is 250, this is 250, this is 30, etc., etc. Adding all these up gives us 1,580. We multiply that times 5 for the required plastic, and we are given about 8 tons. So we're taking 10 tons just because it's a nice round number, and you know, dupe things. I wouldn't be surprised if I catch him eating plastic one day. All things considered, the decor's not too bad. I could have used some more plastic tiles for the dupe to walk on, but it wouldn't have made that big of a difference, and I like the airflow that the mesh tiles provide. You'll see that we have the rocket control station inside the washroom, because, I mean, who hasn't dreamed of that? But it also just makes sense because it's not an industrial machine, so it's a good spot to put it considering your washroom has to be 12 tiles large. So in this configuration, you're left with 6 empty tiles. Looks perfect to me. Finally, we have a refrigerator. Right now it's empty. We'll get to that in a minute. Let's go on over to the experimental ADOS 2. In this configuration, we once again have 3 rooms: the barracks, the mess hall, and the washroom. The bonus being is this duplicate doesn't need to do any orbital data collection. We could have configured it exactly like this and doubled up the orbital data collection, but to be honest, we're going to pump through creating those data banks so fast it's not going to matter. We once again have a duplicate motion sensor connected to a light, but this time for when they're over the wheel. Now this wheel is more important, and one of the reasons why I kept the orbital data collection lab out of this, because the dupe in this rocket is going to be responsible for creating power. You can see there is no battery module here, and while that small petroleum engine is going to be providing that 240 watts, there's no long-term storage of that power on the rocket itself. So we put a nice little battery here and a manual generator. So the pilot in here is going to spend a lot of time running, which makes the ceiling light even more worth it. Why do we need power? Well, our filtration system. Yes, I know we could have done the sort of powerless filtration loop, but I really like seeing what I can do with these gas filters. Provide a little power, and they're very easy. We have a mini gas pump connected to a gas element sensor. Whenever this element sensor detects any carbon dioxide, this pump starts pumping. It'll pump it right through the gas filter. The oxygen will go up through this gas vent. The carbon dioxide will get vented out to space. That's one power requirement. The other is the refrigerator. Now remember, it doesn't take a full 120 watts. Once it's cooled down, we'll be able to put it in that power saver mode and only use 20 watts. And we have the same filtration system right over here as well. So you might be wondering, where are we getting our oxygen from? Well, that's a storage bin full of oxalate. In fact, why don't we go ahead and increase this to 1 ton of oxalate. We'll eventually bring it all the way up to 20 tons, and that brings us to our next point. We now have oxalate creation on the planetoid. Any extra oxygen coming in over from Frostalin heads down to these oxalate refineries. We got them on some switches in case we ever decide we don't need it, and then we added some shipping to it, because of course we did. Whenever this gold volcano erupts, a portion of that gold gets shipped down to the oxalate refineries, and then the oxalate itself gets picked up and thrown in this conveyor loader, goes through this debris chiller, and then ends up being dropped off right here. Right now we have about 4 tons of oxalate, which is pretty impressive considering we haven't been creating it for that long. And we also have another 2 tons sitting inside the rockets. But I wanted more oxygen because that's definitely the bottleneck here. And normally we would just provide a leg right off an electrolyzer. Unfortunately, we're not using one of those. Well, until now. Remember all the water that we're picking up from the excess steam from the industrial sauna? Well, we're pumping it right into this liquid reservoir. The liquid reservoir then dumps it right into an electrolyzer. Whenever this gas element sensor detects that there's oxygen in this little area, these 2 gas pumps, one of them being kind of hidden, start pumping. If it's oxygen, it heads right over to our oxalate refineries. If it's anything else, it joins the junk gases pipe and heads off to space. Nice little interconnected system there. And then finally, we needed some water for the rockets for our toilets. Here are the input pipes here, and we're using what little bit of water we were able to gather from this massive pond down here. This will be all the water that we have on this planetoid until we need to start tapping into Frostalin's reserves. But if we only use this for toilet water for our rockets, it'll last a very, very long time. Speaking of which, that might be the most impressive thing about this planetoid. There isn't any natural formation of water on it, and look at everything we've accomplished. Looks pretty good if you ask me. Next up, it's time to skill scrub some pilots. The morale in here is not going to be too bad, but just in case, we'll give them the fresh start, give them the necessary skills. For instance, we want as much operating skill as we can get for the orbital data collection lab, some rocket piloting, and we'll be good. The last thing we need to talk about is the food situation. While it's absolutely wonderful that we have 1.4 million calories, barbecue is not the most sustainable food type. If we go to the database, we can see that the barbecue has a natural spoil time of 4 cycles. Not very good. On the rockets, they're going to be refrigerated. So let's try putting 1 kilo of barbecue. Actually, we don't even need to do that. We have a refrigerator full of barbecue right here. I stand corrected. Let's go back to this refrigerator. We'll put 1 kilo of barbecue in this refrigerator, and we can see that the change per cycle is 13% while refrigerated, which means the barbecue, even refrigerated, would only last a little over 7 cycles, and that's if it was delivered 100% fresh. Luckily, we have a couple of food types that don't go off at all, in the hexalent fruit and the swamp chard heart. But that in and of itself is not going to last forever. Ideally, we'd be creating some awesome berry sludge. The disadvantage, though, is bristleberries take water, and sleet wheat grains, we have none. So for now, berry sludge is just out the window. So we're going to have to think of a long-term food supply for our rocket missions. And what's going to end up being our best case for now is pickled meal. Throwing in a kilo of pickled meal in this refrigerator, we can see that the change per cycle is only 2%. That means pickled meal would last 50 cycles. Now that's not too shabby. Not as great as the berry sludge that never goes off, but it'll have to do. That's another thing I'd like to hear from you about. What should our rocket food be in the long term? For this mission, we're going to start by grabbing the hexalent fruit. We're going to change this to 100 kilos so it'll grab everything we need, and we'll go down and select hexalent fruit. And with all the hexalent fruit in there, we're also going to grab all the pickled meal. And then our first refrigerator, we will say, yes, we want the pickled meal in here. And then in our second refrigerator, we will grab all the hexalent fruit. Once those are delivered, we'll be ready to go. The question is, who are we sending? Well, one of them is going to be John Archer. They have a 20 in machinery. That's going to be great for pumping out those data banks. The next dupe only needs to run on the wheel. So why don't we send one of our newer dupes, such as Lady Ruff, which will give them a bunch of experience. And Lady Ruff, we won't even need to skill scrub because they only have a morale requirement of 6. Hey John, can I talk to you for a second? Just need you to jump in this machine a little bit. Shaken, not stirred, please. Look at John. As fresh as they were, the cycle they printed. We'll go at rocket piloting and a couple pips into operating. This brings their machinery up to 24. I suppose we could go to rocket piloting too. They have 2 hearts in advanced research and astronomy, so the morale requirement shouldn't be too bad. 10, that's not too shabby. This should be okay. Now let's give them a proper hat. Then we have to make sure that Lady Ruff is a rocket pilot as well. We'll give them a rocket hat too. Yes, I know it's supposed to be a helmet, but clearly it says select hat. And I don't think it's one of those situations where a helmet can also be a hat. Hats are on top of your head. Or maybe it's like the sandwich conundrum. Every sub is a sandwich, but not every sandwich is a sub. So it sounds like I clearly have been recording too long, because I'm starting to get loopy. But before we send those rockets off, you'll notice that we have over 1,100 units of reed fiber, which means we have plenty to spare for some beautiful carpet, so we can get that tickled toesies buff. Just highlighting over carpet doesn't actually say exactly what it does. Yeah, it decreases run speed, it increases decor, but that's not all. If we take Andy here, who just woke up from a wonderful nap, you can see that they have tickled tootsies. That's even cuter than tickled toesies. And tickled tootsies will give them minus 15% stress per cycle. Nice little hidden benefit they don't tell you about. Makes me wonder what other things in the game aren't listed in any disorder description that are just waiting to be discovered. Now the only disadvantage is you'll notice that the tickled tootsies only last 15 seconds per. So in other words, they have to be sleeping or walking on the carpet in order to get the tickled tootsies. Now nobody tell Clay, because I'm sure they would not want them to get the tickled tootsies while sleeping in a bed that is on carpet, because their tootsies are clearly not being tickled. That makes me want to expand the tickled tootsies tiles. Yes, say that 5 times fast. So we're going to put it in the Great Hall as well. Our rockets are fueled up and ready to go. Well, almost. I did not connect the large fuel tank to this rocket here because I want to compare the difference. This small petroleum engine with its large liquid fuel tank full, holding 900 kilos of petroleum, plus the 450 that the engine itself stores, apparently gives me a range. Oh no. Oh man, I've completely skipped over the oxidizer. For some reason I was thinking that the petroleum engines didn't take oxidizer. That's how long it's been since I've made a petroleum engine. Let's get to the bottom of this though. If we go back over to the wiki, you can see that sugar, petroleum, and hydrogen propulsed rockets require oxidizers. And the key here is the ratio. It's a 1-to-1 when using fertilizer. In other words, if you have 450 kilos worth of petroleum, you'd need 450 kilos of fertilizer, and 1 to 2 when using oxalate. We're not even going to look at liquid oxygen quite yet. So I'm thinking we're going to use oxalate. We have plenty. The problem is, we're kind of out of space. I know exactly what we're going to do. We're going to remove this large liquid fuel tank. Goodbye. And then, unfortunately, we're going to remove this battery module. You remember inside the Curious Sputnik, we have a battery. So that battery was, sort of extra. With this small solid oxidizer tank, it's not going to give us 100% efficiency. We can only hold 450 kilos of oxalate, which means we're only going to have enough oxalate to oxidize 900 kilos of petroleum. And unfortunately, we have 1,350. So our range is going to suffer a little on that. But I'm okay, especially considering we'll still have Rover's module. On the experimental adios, though, the small solid oxidizer tank will work great. You might wonder why we didn't just put a large oxidizer tank. Well, they're just too big. You could see it would fit on this one, but unless we were willing to remove Rover's module, we're kind of stuck. It's not too big of a deal. These are going to be upgraded to the large petroleum engines here soon, and then we'll be able to have more height to experiment with, which based on the amount of room we have left, we may have to lower our spaceport a little bit. I can't believe I forgot the oxidizer. With all the oxalates loaded up, we have a range of 20 tiles. That's pretty significant. We can go 10 tiles in any direction before we have to return home, which in the case of our home planet means we can get to the edge of the map. On the experimental ADOS, with 450 kilos worth of petroleum and 225 kilos worth of oxalate, we are given a total range of 10 tiles. So that means we're only going to be able to go 5 out. But even going 5 out with that cartographic module, we should be able to at least see what a few of these objects are. I think we made Lady Ruff the pilot of this one, and then John Archer the pilot of the Sputnik. We have 37 cycles worth of Hexalant loaded up in the Sputnik, and still no pickled meal here. What's going on? Okay, well this is troublesome. It says we're out of pickled meal. Apparently I never unselected it from this refrigerator, so it was added back. We'll get this pickled meal loaded up immediately. An update on the oxygen. You can see how pretty consistently the oxygen's being produced with the additional gas pumps. On this main leg, there's not even a gap. I also wanted to show you how little petroleum you actually need. Despite having 5 tons in this reservoir and both rockets fully fueled, we still have this much remaining. And we're only cooking 400 grams per second in the petroleum boiler. Alright, the pickled meal's been delivered. It is time to crew up and ship out. First thing we need to do is make sure they drop their suits. That's better. We will enable the wall toilets now. I didn't have it grounded because I still wanted to be able to access all the storage bins and the refrigerators. We will assign the cots. And the last thing to do is set the destination. Since this rocket doesn't have a cartographic module, we can't go into the fogged out spaces. So we'll start by going right here. This one with the cartographic module, we can go anywhere we want, but our range is much more limited. So let's start by going and exploring this unknown object here. And we're going to pause it to see if we can get that side-by-side launch. That never seems to happen. And away we go. Didn't I tell you we'd make it to space? When Echo Ridge Gaming says they're going to go to space, they mean they're going to space. Most of the time. Sometimes. Okay, it hardly ever happens. But we're in space, and that's what matters. Lady Ruff's gonna have a much more boring adventure than John Archer, but hey, at least they have a wheel to run on when they happen to use enough power to drain the battery, which may not happen very often, considering they're generating 240 watts while they're in space because of the small petroleum engine. And I don't see any other way to drain power in here, so enjoy the trip, Lady Ruff. John Archer, on the other hand, has plenty to do, and that is our first data bank. Way to go, team. Just to confirm, they are getting the lit workspace while using the orbital data collection lab, so I highly recommend putting a ceiling light whenever you do this. And there you have it. Our adventures to space have begun. I think we're going to have a couple priorities going into the next few episodes. It'd be really nice to find some sleet wheat, although I don't know how we're going to grow the bristleberries quite yet. Maybe Frostine can be our space food production facility. They have plenty of water here, and the temperature is oh so very nice for the sleet wheat. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget, I want to hear your suggestions for the rocket names. I will be selecting 2 of them from the comments below. Also, in case you weren't aware, we run another Oxygen Not Included series live on Twitch. And we're getting ready to start a brand new colony there. So even if you can't make it over to Twitch to watch it live, you'll still have new VODs to look forward to. And I upload those to YouTube after 24 hours. I hope you had a great time in this episode. I know I did. And I'll talk to you soon. Space. The final frontier. Space. The final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship. Nope, that's not right. Space. The final frontier. What is this, a horror movie?